It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Do I even need to say a word after that little giggle? It's time for Baby Talk with Meg. Welcome back. Thank you so much to you for joining us. We are talking about our babies talking this morning. We'd love to hear from you. Obviously, this is a very fundamental developmental stage in our babies' lives, but nothing is a standard. So please, we are not there for you to judge your own child's progression on. That's not what this chat is about. It's about enjoying these milestones and learning more about what they mean for our little ones. Do you have a comment? Do you have a question? 021-4309-881.
Well, Meg, I'm going to start off with the first question, because since we're taking the baby talk literally, at what age do babies normally or generally start talking?
So most little ones have got about 2 words at 12 months of age. So that's kind of when it usually starts to kick off. But of course, before that, they are understanding so much more. So they start to understand at about 6 to 8 months. They're really understanding a lot. And then by a year, they're saying about 2 words. And then at about 18 to 24 months, that's when they have their language explosion, which is where language just suddenly goes completely through the roof.
So how far ahead is their understanding then their ability to express that understanding? What's the
What's
gap
the gap?
there?
Yeah, so receptive language, which is understanding, develops about 8 months ahead of expressive language. So your baby actually can understand way more than you know. So if you think that they're saying, let's say 5 words at 13 months, they understood 8 months before that, at least 5 words. So their understanding comes on a whole lot sooner, which is a problem for us.
Yeah, what you say?
What you say? Well, do babies all generally have the same words that normally come out, or is it dependent on what conversations they're exposed to?
Yeah, exposure is extremely important. Babies do have a trajectory that we generally see, like usually the first word's actually dada, much to the mother's disdain.
Yeah, it's easy to say. Yeah, no, it is. It's dada,
Dada. So after they finish babbling and they move on to words, their first word is normally dada, and that's pretty much, for most English-speaking children, what their first word will be. But then, according to what you're exposed to, that's what the rest of your language does. So if you're exposed to things like swearing, you're going to pick up on that. So watch what you say, moms and dads, because it does come out.
Watch
Little
Meet the
ears
Fockers
hear
if you want to get a sense.
everything.
Yes.
Jack's first word, I don't know if it's a word or an expression, but it's wow. And it's like, everything is wow. Yeah, and that's awesome that the wonder exists there. These milestones, what does it mean in the mental development of what's going on in that child, and what should we as parents be watching out for? Can we coach this? Can we improve it? Is it something we should even be looking at in that way, or is it something that should just be left to naturally develop? How do you
well,
see
it's
it?
very important not to compare our children, because everybody develops differently. So, and you know, it's quite interesting. I've known some babies who are almost completely silent, no words, just a lot of babbling. And then suddenly they come out at 18 months in sentences, or 2 years old in sentences. So it's very, very important that we don't go, well, that kid's got 5 words at one.
Same as walking, crawling, all of these things.
Absolutely. But even more so with language, it's very, very variable. But there is a huge amount that we actually do as parents that does impact our child's language development in particular.
Is talking baby talk back to them bad for them?
Well, there's
assuming.
so there's 2 different types of things that you'd call baby talk. The one is what we call parentese, which is a slightly higher pitched voice, a little bit of a sing-songy tone, like, hello, my baby, how are you doing? And that's fine, because that higher pitched tone is what babies are drawn towards.
But it's an expression of love as well.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're going to start with using nonsense words, that's not beneficial. So if you're always saying, let's have some num-nums, instead of saying, would you like some lunch? You know, then that's not the best thing. But certainly the tone is the right way to go, but not the belittling of words.
Okay. I won't use it.
Grandmothers across the country are shaking their heads at you right now, Meg. So what milestones should we be looking in that second year? Because that seems to be where the key kind of launch phase happens.
Yeah, no, it certainly does. So the first thing that happens just after your baby turns 1 is that he should have about 2 words. And usually that's things like mama and dada and nanams and things like that. So babies do use those words. And then towards 15 months, they could have up to 50 words or 40 words. And as I said at the beginning, not every baby is going to do this, but that would be what the average would be doing. And then what starts to happen close to 2 years of age is what we call the language explosion. And that is suddenly when babies are literally learning a new word every day, and they start to spill out words. And then once they've got about 50 words in their vocabulary, which happens closer to 2 years, they then can start to link them in sentences. And then you start to have little 3-word sentences, want some num-nums, or want to go out.
And what do you do, at what stage should a parent start considering, okay, maybe, you know, we should go see a speech therapist? At what age is it should you raise the flag or the question?
So there are definite flags in the first 2 years of life, but they're actually not to do with words themselves.
Okay.
They're to do with the mind behind the words. So for instance, if your baby doesn't smile, which is actually one of our first forms of communication, if they don't smile at 6 weeks of age, or definitely by 8 weeks, I would be going, what's going on? Are they waving and pointing by about 10, 11 months of age? You know, so if they didn't smile and they're not waving and pointing, or they're not babbling, or they're not turning towards sound. So those are critical milestones in the pathway to speech. And if any of those are missing in the first year of life, I would be cautious, and I would be taking them actually to the pediatrician at that time.
Okay.
And in the second year of life, if they don't move from babble into actual words by 18 months of life, so they've really got absolutely no words at 18 months, and maybe a couple of the other things I mentioned in the first year of life were also potentially not there. Those are your flags, and then you're wondering. But if your baby has smiled and waved and pointed in direction and they're babbling and they've got only 2 words at 18 months, I'm not worried too much because they're doing everything to communicate, they just haven't bedded down the words.
Okay.
When it gets really interesting around 3, if my experience in a shopping centre with a poor woman whose child was explaining their entire life and their trip overseas is anything to go by, that's the fun stuff. We would love to hear from you though. 021 430 9881. Give us a call. We're going to continue in a moment.
It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Time for a little more baby talk. Welcome back. We've got Meg here talking about those fundamental phases that we as parents get to enjoy as our children activate their linguistic skills. And as a parent, you believe everything that they are saying is a real word and intentional and directed at you, but maybe that's not the case.
No, not the case. Well, listen, our lines are open. If you've got a comment or a question for Meg, feel free to call us. It's 021 430 9881. Meg, during the ad break, we had a caller that wanted to know, you know, by when should your child make intentional sounds, and when is it different from babbling?
Yeah. So babbling is the precursor to intentional sound. So that's when they start to link consonants and vowels, like ba, 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 ga, 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 that sort of sound. And initially it means absolutely nothing. So there's no thought behind it. They're not really referencing dada or food or dog at the time. But what they very interestingly do, and they start to do this definitely in the second half of the first year, so from 6 months onwards, is they start to use tone to indicate there's actually conversation happening. So they're practicing tone, they're practicing conversational skills, things like taking turns. So they might go, and then pause and wait for you to respond, which of course we do. And that is a very important precursor to speech with meaning, which comes later.
And it's amazing how much you can actually start to glean from what they are saying. You know, and I think we express ourselves physically through our tone. All of these things play a role. We were laughing about getting to the 3 age group, and I've had such a hilarious moment where a mother sat there completely red-faced while her child explained the life story as it was unfolding, and all of the fellow shoppers got to get this. But you mentioned earlier a vocabulary of 50 words. That's when things really take a leap up. What should be happening at around 3 years old?
So from 2 years onwards, they start to activate their imagination and really start to use words in their minds. And that's really when we start to see a language explosion. So they've already gone through the stage of wanting to just communicate, and now they start to really link meaning to words, to actions, to people, and so they're linking sentences at that time. And then they can activate imagination, and when they do that, they're saying, you know, come and play with me. I want to play this game, you know, and suddenly you've really got wonderful, rich language coming through.
And they're so honest. I mean, I love it. I once had a little girl tell me at church, because I was wearing ripped jeans, she was like, why are your pants like that? And I'm like, well, it's the style. She's like, you look scrappy. I'm looking a bit scrappy for church. But Meg, dual language, that's something a lot of South African homes, a lot of homes in fact have, you know, multiple languages. At what stage do you introduce your child to the new languages or the different languages?
So the rule of thumb is that from birth, every parent must speak their own home language. So even nannies as well. So nannies and mums and dads must speak their own home language. And the reason for that is we call it the mother tongue for a reason. It's called that because it's the way that our mothers spoke to us, and it's the strongest way in which we convey emotion. And emotion in language is much more important for little babies than the actual message itself. Okay. So my suggestion is to all parents to speak your own language. So if you've got a Zulu dad and an Afrikaans mom, speak your own languages from fairly early on. Then, as your baby approaches about 18 months, you can start to gauge whether or not they have got a capacity for developing languages, you know, really well. And if they have, then what you want to do is continue in all your languages, because then you can have a child who speaks multiple languages, which is very valuable.
What?
Yeah,
An
hugely valuable.
advantage moving forward. I want to ask this, and it might seem a bit silly, but you know, people have certain dispositions, certain maybe genetic predispositions to being language people, to being maths people, does this exist within the baby, or is this something that is developed? Is it a bit of a grey area?
No, it definitely is. I mean, we are born with a capacity for in a certain direction, but it's also nurtured into us. So let's say genetically you have the gift of the gab. Good chance your little boy does too. But in addition to that, because you've got the gift of the gab, you talk a lot to him. And so that beds that down even further.
Why are you looking at me when you say
Because you're the dad.
You're the dad. Exactly. So yes, I mean, it's a little bit of genes, a lot of nature, and a lot of nurture that goes towards it. But you can have a baby who doesn't have the capacity for strong language with a very chatty parent who does develop good language skills and high verbal IQs. So, yeah.
Meg, can we go back to that example where you used, introducing Zulu and Afrikaans as an example into your child's life? Does that mean in terms of the milestones that by 18 months, will that child have the same frame of vocabulary, like you said, 50 words by, or 50 words by 3?
By two, yeah.
By 2.
Yeah, between 18 months and 2 years. And that's such an important question, because by 18 months, if they're not showing that they're taking both languages, then you do need to narrow down to one language. Okay. And that's the time at which we generally make the decision. So sometimes if you have the child, like you mentioned, Graham, where the child doesn't have good genetic capacity for language, they get to 18 months, there's been 2 languages heard, they're getting neither of them very well, then you have to narrow it down. Yeah,
to just one.
To just one language, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, man, it's lovely. Maybe you want to give us the first words so that, and I don't mean just mama or dada, but the most interesting ones you can let us know on our social media platforms. In fact, send us videos of your little ones babbling away. But hopefully this has given you some insight into those key developmental stages. But I have to reiterate all the time, especially as a new parent, there is no exact standard. We just want you to be aware so that if you are missing these milestones, that you have the education to be able to speak to the experts like Meg. But this is always just so cool.
Yeah,
man.
it is very important. I mean, variable milestones. Please don't walk away panicking that your baby's not doing 50 words at 2 years old, because remember what I said is that some babies go with very few words and then suddenly turn straight into sentences.
There's an explosion.
And there's an explosion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Meg, thank you so much for joining, and to all our callers, thank you so much for participating. We'll be doing this again next week with our Baby Talk segments.